Traveling. Do I take my DSLR kit or mirrorless kit? Decisions. As I was preparing for an upcoming trip to Peru, I was trying to decide what kit to take. Mainly that meant making the decision between whether I wanted my DSLR Nikon D7200 or my mirrorless Sony a6000. I wrote a blog about the Sony a6000, which you can read here at Mirrorless Cameras. But the short version is, there were just so many things that I did not like about it. I had bought it as a travel companion, and one that I had hoped to switch to over entirely, but it had not been a smooth romance from the beginning. For this trip, there were a couple of considerations. There would be an 11-kilometer hike from our hotel near Machu Picchu through a cloud forest to the last stop on the rail line. This was also a restriction of carry-on luggage on domestic flights, of which we had 2, and it was restricted to 10 pounds. The hike would necessitate I carry all my camera gear on my back for this trek, and I would not leave it on a bus along with my luggage. And the carry-on weight for domestic flights was fairly minimal, especially since I'm routinely used to using 22-pound allowances. So despite all my reservations and my love-hate relationship with the Sony, it was starting to make sense I switch over and to using the Sony kit for this trip. This was even before crunching any real figures. Needs for the trip would be 1 camera body. I am internally optimistic and not afraid to use my cell phone exclusively should I need to. 1 wide-angle lens for all the beautiful scenery, and a carry-around lens, which for me is a 24 to 70 millimeter or some type like this. I did want to have a bit of a telescopic lens, as there would be times we would see wildlife and possibly street events, but that was a secondary consideration for me. I'm not big into these types of photography. My Nikon kit consisted of my Nikon D72, which is 675 grams, weights without battery, a Tamron 11 to 18 lens, weight 355 grams for landscape, a Nikon 24 to 70 millimeter lens for walkabout, weight 900 grams. Now, as I add up my somewhat mediocre 70 to 300 lens, weight 400 grams, and this is quickly becoming a very heavy kit for a travel adventure. And not to mention the size of the pack, which would be much larger to hold this larger kit. And a proper carbon fiber tripod to hold this heavier kit, a cheap Cameron 700, weight 1,250 grams. Now I was looking at 3,580 grams, the equivalent of just under 8 pounds. This was the minimum weight for this kit, without all the add-ons, such as batteries, L brackets, filter sets, etc. I was tired just thinking about lugging it around. Now with the Sony, I had 3 lenses, of which 2 were kit lens. The 16 to 50 millimeter, which I actually really liked, but found a bit too short for a general all-purpose walk-around lens. The 50 millimeter prime, not really useful or required for this trip, and the 55 to 210 kit lens, which was notoriously crappy and soft throughout most of its range. For such a once-in-a-lifetime trip, and I must say now I'm on my 4th such trip, in order to take the Sony with me, I would need some updates in glass. Read paying big bucks. So after much research, I settled on the Zeiss 16 to 70 millimeter, 308 grams, as a walk-around, and the Sony 10 to 18 millimeters, 225 grams for the landscape. I rounded this out with the subpar Sony kit, 55 to 210, which was 345 grams, as I was willing to try my best with it, which generally has a sweet spot of f8 between the 120 and 180 millimeters, with lots, and I mean lots, of light. Round this off with a smaller carbon fiber tripod, the Cameron 600 at 980 grams, and the weight of the Sony a6000, 285 grams. Now, we won't talk about the fact that this decision essentially made the trip an extra few $1,000s more than initially planned, since I had to purchase all this new kit for the trip. But when I looked at the figures, Nikon kit just shy of 8 pounds, or the Sony kit at 4.5 pounds, the decision was easy. Facing that 11-kilometer walk would be much easier with almost half the weight, and I could take some extra items in my carry-on bag and be sure to be way under the domestic 10-pound limit. In the end, our 11-kilometer trek was canceled, and others in my group were admitted on the airplane with carry-ons much heavier than the weight restriction. So was I happy with the decision? Yes, I was very happy with my photos and pleased with the much smaller bag and load. I actually walked around most times with the Sony on a black rapid strap and a small belt bag with the water lens and 2 batteries. The benefits of this kit certainly outweighed the negatives on this trip. Now, next year I am planning a trip to Alaska, which will hopefully include animal and bird photography. This is a whole different kettle of fish. I'm currently weighing the cons and pros of each kit again, but with different needs. It will be landscape and wildlife. So now we are talking about needing reach and lots of reach. I do not have that with the Nikon or Sony now, so I will need to make some big investment. But which lens for which kit? That will be for a future blog.